first half is where God is just dropping artillery rounds on the world in general for what they have done. Then it is the time of Jacob's trouble, and I will illustrate this more because there is an escape right here. We get out here, guys. We leave here. But there is a mid-tribulation rapture. It just isn't you, and it isn't me, all right? But the second reason is because it is called Jacob's trouble. You're not Jacob. I'm not Jacob. Fact is, we're not even Gentiles anymore. You know, the Bible, you know, I will refer to myself as a Gentile. I'll refer to you as Gentiles because that's what we came from. And you know that the Apostle Paul was a Jew. And when he talks about his lineage, he will mention being a Jew. But he said there are Jews, there are Gentiles, and there are the church of God. And when you and I got saved, we were no longer, if you were a Jew, if there's somebody here that was Jewish, when you got saved, you're no longer a Jew. That's why I don't like these Messianic Jewish ministries where they get a bunch of Christians, you know, keeping Passover and dancing around to Jewish tunes. Why would you be, and they're Gentiles. They're Gentiles that got saved, now they're acting like Jews. God doesn't even want the Jews acting like the Jews once they get saved. We are totally different. Guys, this service is different from a Jewish service. This service is different than a Gentile, pagan service. I will say one thing where Al Gore is right. Man, that hurt to say that. Anyway, you know what he said? He said before Christianity, because he hates Christianity, he said before Christianity, he said the Gentile world worshipped a female deity. Well, it didn't, but they were pagans. They were heathen. You know, we talk about black people and Indians being in tribes. Well, what do you think your kin were about 3,000 years ago? They might have been up in Europe, but we all rubbed bear grease on ourselves and went out and bashed each other's brains out while the crops were growing. We were all from tribes. You understand? And when the gospel came up into Europe, you know what them white guys saw? This beats anything. The tribalism fell apart and nationalism came into being. Europe was formed because of that Bible. That's where nations came into being. But you are not technically, I mean in God's eyes, you are not a Gentile. If you were a Jew before you got saved, you are not a Jew. You are part of the church of God. Now you understand, I'm not talking about First Church of God down the street, but we are part of the church of God. So you are not Jacob, and even the saved Jews are not Jacob. Take a look at Romans chapter 11. I keep saying Revelation, forgive me. In Romans chapter 11, Paul talks about Israel. This guy, Anderson, he hates the Jews. How many of you believe about the Holocaust of World War II, where the Germans put them in ovens and did it? Okay. He has a tape out called The Hoax of the Holocaust. And if somebody walked up here and they're 90 years old and they show you the number tattoo that they were in Auschwitz, he said every Holocaust survivor is a paid liar. Now, I'll tell you something, guys. Personally, this is bad doctrine, teaching that we're going to have to go through halfway through tribulation. And if you buy it, you just buy bad doctrine. But you go anti-Semitic, and you're an enemy of God's people. See, I don't believe that Israel was God's chosen people. I think they still are God's chosen people. But you know that they have gotten away from their God, have they not? And so for about 2,000 years now, he has been dealing with the Gentiles. Now, here's an amazing thing. This guy hates the Jews, but look what Paul says in chapter 11, verse 1. I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid. For I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham and of the tribe of Benjamin. God hath not cast away his people, which he foreknew. Guys, this guy believes that God did exactly that. That God has cast away. Could I give you something? I'm not even going to show you this. In fact, maybe I'm lying to you, and you'll have to find out. The one book in the Bible that really talks about the judgment of God falling on Israel is the book of Jeremiah. Over and over, he said, I am going to do this to you, I'm going to do this to you, I'm going to do this to you. Would you please read your Bible? When you read your Bible, when you read Jeremiah, when you come to one of those places, here's what you're going to find. All right, how many of you ever did this? You spanked your child. and then you reestablish fellowship, and kind of you hugged them, and okay? In other words, you had to let them know, I'm doing this because you were bad, but I still love you after it's over, and I'm okay? That is exactly what God does in Jeremiah. Here's what you'll see. God may spend 15 verses saying, I'm going to do this to you, I'm going to do this to you, I'm going to do this to you, and then when he's done, he says, but I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to reestablish you. I'm going to bring a remnant. I don't think, I want to say absolute, but I don't think he ever says, I'm going to punish you without finishing with, I'm going to bring you back. And that's what he's done. Right now, he is not dealing with them because they crucified their Messiah. Okay, look what it says now in verse, let's pick up at verse 13. For I speak to you Gentiles. Now see, he's talking to Romans who are saved, but he's talking to them because as opposed to Jew and Gentile, they're part of the church of God, but he's talking to them about their heritage. For I speak unto you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office. If by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them. Do you know what Stephen Anderson did? He went to Michigan, to Dearborn. Dearborn is the Muslim capital of this country. And he has a video called Marching to Zion. It's totally anti-Semitic. And his people went to Muslim households wearing T-shirts. Would you wear this T-shirt? It had the Palestinian flag and it said Free Palestine. And get this. You know where they found that video? They have found that video in Syria in ISIS camps in a training manual on how Muslims can infiltrate our churches. They are using Stephen Anderson to infiltrate our churches. Because if you get them on one thing, you'll get them on another. So, but here's the thing. He hates the Jews. Here's what Paul says. He said, I am dealing with you guys. I'm hoping the Jews get jealous and they trust Christ. Paul always showed his heart for the Jews. This guy hates the Jews. He does. 15, for if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall be the receiving of them but life from the dead? For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. If the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree wert grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the fruit of the root and fatness of the olive tree, boast not against the branches. That's what he's doing. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Here's what he's saying. There was not a wild olive tree, but a good one. And it's called Israel. And Israel rejected their Messiah. So you know what God did? He didn't cut the tree down. He tells us, he says, you put a band of copper around it. He said, you kill that thing. He said, we're not trying to kill this tree. He said, we're just breaking some of the limbs off. Then you know what he did? He went out and got your ancestors and mine and grafted them in. Now, I don't know a lot about horticulture, but I have heard this being done. A guy takes an apple branch and grafts it into a peach tree, and it produces apples, while the rest of the tree produces peaches. Well, guys, if you can do that, don't you think you could take a wild olive branch and graft it into a good olive tree? Yeah, and you are. You know how I know you're grafted into the good olive tree? Because you're sitting there right now with a Jewish book in your lap. And you're trusting your soul to a Jew. Isn't that true? So, guys, you say, yeah, look, everything we have, we go back to Israel. If you get rid of this book, if you get rid of all of our history of Israel, we're a wild olive branch this far off the ground being suspended on nothing. So he said, look, if a guy I couldn't do this. Maybe somebody here could. If you had a wild olive branch, you could graft it into a good olive tree and it'd produce fruit. Maybe you could do that. But if you could do that, surely you could then, here's where you cut it off, and you put this wild olive branch out here, then couldn't you cut that one off and graft the branch that belonged in there on? I mean, if you can put a wild one on there, I think if you could put an apple branch on a peach tree, putting a peach branch on a peach tree is light work. And he said, Israel is set aside, and he said, don't boast yourself against the tree, verse 18, because he said, you're not holding the tree up, the tree's holding you up. Verse 19, thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Does that not sound like a Gentile? I mean, you've never seen a bunch of prouder people than us. Well, God got rid of the Jews so they could get a man of my caliber. Yeah, 22 blank. Hollow point. Anyway, look at verse 20. Well, because of unbelief they are broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God. You know, that is the perfect description of a good father. A good father is good, but there are times when he has to be severe. If you are not good, you are a miserable individual. But if you think, well, I'll just never be severe to my children, then you're not a good father. There is a time when it just isn't good fellowship. You put them over your knee and you wear them out. That's the severity. The goodness is that you reestablish a fellowship. You always let them know. Oh, I don't. You know, I heard a liberal say this, showing how stupid they are. They don't believe in spanking kids. They think that's abuse. They said, don't spank them. Withhold your love from them and punish them now. Are you kidding me? Could you imagine a child that just knows that love can be taken that quick? I mean, that kid should know while they're being spanked, I'm being spanked by somebody that loves me. Amen. I told my kids, this hurts me worse than it hurts you. Anyway, that was part of severity. Behold now, therefore, the goodness and severity of God, on them which fell, severity, that's Israel. But toward thee, goodness, if thou continue in his goodness. All right, let me ask you a question. Now, I think, say what you want, I think the United States has been pretty much the center of active Christianity. Most of the missionaries come from our country. Those who don't, most of the others come from English-speaking nations. But our nation has done more. You know, Vanuatu, little island in the South Pacific, there was it was taken by the British. They had it. And then when the British left, we came in. And you know what they said? They said they couldn't understand it because when they saw Americans come, the natives, they didn't like us because we were white, because the British abused them. And they couldn't believe that these other white guys were nice to them. In New Guinea, they were owned by the British and then the Australians. They don't like the British and they don't like the Australians. But they love the Americans. Because, you know what they said? Now, you hear all this stuff, you know, well, Americans are so bigoted and prejudiced. You know what those people in Vanuatu said? They said that those Americans treat us like themselves. That is how amazing this nation has been. But we are not now continuing in that goodness. You have to realize that. Otherwise, verse 22, thou also shalt be cut off. And they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. Now watch, for if thou wert cut out of the olive tree which is wild by nature, and wert grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? He said if God could take us Gentiles, these crazy hooping barbarians, the Celts and the Vaudois and all, I mean, if he can take them and graft them into a Jewish book and a Jewish lineage, then he can certainly cut us back out and put the Jews back in. But look at verse 25. For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness, what's the next two words? In part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. So guys, you know, I think you can see it. Can you not see that we are seeing, you know, God doesn't always deal right here, and tomorrow it's all different. What you see is like, here is the end of a period, and here is the beginning, and they're like this. So you know what you saw in 1948, on May 14th, 1948, just a few days ago, some anniversary. But that was the day that modern Israel came back into existence, May 14th, 1948. And on that day, the day it happened, 14 Arab nations invaded Israel. 14 of them. And Israel whipped them. And when they whipped them, they had more land than the original United Nations land grant. And look how many times, guys, come on, in your life, you know you cannot militarily or physically explain the military victories that Israel's had over their enemies. We can now look. We can all say they're great soldiers and they're brave and they're well trained. I believe all of that, but I am telling you, it's more than that. Those guys have done things. There is in this last time, just two of them. One guy was. They had a squad of special forces of Israeli special forces, and they had to get to their objective in the dark, and a fog came in. Or no, they got held up because there was some enemy there, and they couldn't make it. Now they're going to have to, in plain sight, and they know they're going to be seen, they're going to be killed. But he didn't have any choice. And so the guy, before the commanding officer said, okay, guys, we're just going to have to make a run for it, that's when a fog came in. Just out of, he said, the fog descended. And they just went, just like it was night, they went to their objective. Just before we went over there in October of 2014, they fired 2 missiles out of Gaza at Tel Aviv airport. And the Jews fired 2 Patriots and missed. And there is no time. These things are going to hit in 30 seconds. And there's no time to relaunch. It's going to take a minute to send a couple Patriots up. They're going to hit. And this was a headline. This was a Palestinian complaining. He said, their God is changing the course of our missiles while they're in the air. And what happened is they fired 2 rockets at Tel Aviv. They fired 2 Patriot missiles and they missed. These 2 rockets are going to hit Tel Aviv International Airport. And it said a wind came out of the east and blew them into the Mediterranean. You say, what is that? That is not that God is done dealing with the Gentiles, but we are seeing that. You know what the worst thing that's going to happen in our country? We're going to have to learn to live with God's blessing, not here. Because the stuff that, come on, guys, you look at, the intricateness, the intertwining of our society and how everything is done. Man, if God just quits blessing it, He didn't have to curse it. He just quit blessing it, and we're going to be walking around bumping into things. So we are seeing the fullness of the Gentiles come in, and God beginning to deal with the Jews again. And that's where we are. We are right here, right now. You cannot say God is no longer being kind. I don't know if I say bless, but being kind to this country. He's still being merciful to our country, is He not? I'll give you an example. You remember, I think it was 89, the big earthquake. We had 2 earthquakes, one in San Francisco and one in Los Angeles. Now, those are 2 large metropolitan areas. The same time, they had one in Kobe, Japan. In those 2, they lost 500 Americans. In Kobe, Japan, they lost 5,000. Now, they say, oh, but yeah, but those 2, our 2 cities are earthquake-proof. So is Kobe, Japan. It's just as modern as it can be. You know what it is? That is not a Christian nation. God is still merciful to us, okay? Can I give you the prayer that I pray every day for this country? I have a hard time asking God to bless us. So I ask this. Let me show you. This is not in this, but I want to show you. Go to Numbers chapter 14. Numbers chapter 14. Now, our God the Bible says He's merciful. He's of great kindness. He repents him of the evil. He is gracious. He is long-suffering, right? But boy, when you get Him mad, I mean, you push him. Okay. All right. Yeah, okay. Yeah. But when you finally get Him mad, like everybody on the planet dies except 8 people. I mean, like somebody said, if God and Moses ever got in a killing mood at the same time, there'd be nobody saved. And look what God gets mad at Israel. Look what He says in Numbers chapter 14, verse 12. He said, I will smite them with the pestilence and disinherit them. Now, He's going to wipe them out. And then He says this, and will make of thee a greater nation and mightier than they. And here's how I know I see humor where it probably isn't, but I hear God saying to Moses, I'm going to smite them with pestilence and disinherit them. And he's going, no, no, and make a greater nation than them out of you. No kidding. I mean, could you imagine going to work and the company owner comes down and he says, I fired your boss. I'm fed up with him. I'm firing him. And Seth goes, no, yeah, and I'm going to make you the boss. No kidding. So here's Moses, man. He is getting the ultimate promotion, is he not? Look what he says in verse 19. Pardon, I beseech thee, thy iniquity, the iniquity of this people. You know what the difference between forgiveness and pardon is? Forgiveness is you ask for forgiveness and get it. Pardon is you didn't even ask for the forgiveness. God just pardoned them. He said, look, they're not even going to ask you forgiveness. Will you just pardon them? Pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of thy mercy, and as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. Now, how many times, guys, in your Bible has God told somebody to do something, and you found a little verse where that person came back to God and said, I did what you told me, I did what you told me, I did what you told me, right? Look what you see in verse 20. This is not a man talking to God. This is God talking to a man saying, and the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word. God said to Moses, I did what you told me. So I pray a twofold prayer every day. Every morning I say this. I cannot ask God to bless this country. I wish I could, but I'm embarrassed by my nation. But this is a valid prayer. Pardon us. I say, pardon us and revive us. Now, pardon us, you know what that means? We don't get the guillotine. But that's all it means. We don't get the bad we got coming. God gets nothing. So I say, pardon us and revive us. If he revives us, then he gets glory, does he not? Well, I'm sorry, guys, but if he's not going to revive us, I don't want him to pardon us. If he's not going to get something, who are we that we should get something? Most of us want a revival in this country just so that we don't get it in the neck. That's why we don't want it so that God gets glory and honor and blessing. So, guys, we're coming to that time when God is done with the Gentiles. We're seeing it, and we're going to see it more and more. We're going to see things that just won't make any sense, and it's just going to be the fact that there's no blessing of God. Now, I want you to look at, just got a couple more. Look at Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24. All right? Matthew chapter 24 is not for us. You have got to get that through your head. It is not for us. I had a guy tell me one time, he said, I don't believe in dispensations. I said, do you believe in Old and New Testament? Yes. I said, okay. I mean, isn't an Old and New Testament, isn't that evident that God is dealing in one way in the Old Testament and another in the New? And here's the kick. And I want you to look at verse 29, Matthew 24, verse 29. We looked at this. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, etc., and so on. All right, that verse is the one that he uses and everybody else to prove that we're going halfway through the tribulation. You know the other verse they use? None. There, you don't even have two. That is it. That is the sole verse. That is the one where they start. That is the one where they finish. That's the only thing they can get. See, when you have a preacher, it is obvious that there's a tribulation and there's a rapture. Absolutely. Let me tell you what happens. First off, the gospel that is being preached here, the message being preached here is not the gospel of the grace of God. I have a message. It's incidental, but and you may not agree with this, but if you don't, start. The Bible describes three gospels. Isn't gospel just mean good news? Okay, I'm going to tell you three bits of good news from God. The first one is the everlasting gospel. Now, can I ask you a question? If I have two pulpits here, and I say, this one is everlasting, what's that tell you about the other one? That it's not everlasting. What possible gospel could always be everlasting and always be true? Keep your place here, go to Revelation 14. Revelation chapter 14. I will show you something that is always good news. This is always good for anybody that heeds this gospel. Now, mind you, you can heed the everlasting gospel and go to hell. But your life will be better for it. Here's what it is. Look at verse 6. I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to them that dwell on the earth, and every nation, and kindred, and tongue, and people. All right, he's preaching the everlasting gospel. Here's what he's saying. Saying with a loud voice, 1, fear God. 2, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. 3, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. So the everlasting gospel is fear God, glorify God, and worship God. What would our country be like if every lost man, woman, and child, I said every lost one, feared God, glorified God, and worshiped God? Would it not be a better place? And don't you think somewhere along the line, if you follow that one, you're going to pick up on the grace? I mean, if you fear God and give him glory and worship him, when somebody comes by and says, well, let me tell you what he did for you, let his son die for you. Really? Yeah, you don't have to go to hell. You're going to hell right now, but you don't have to. Whoa. So that gospel leads you to the second one. All right, the other gospel is the gospel, of the kingdom of heaven. Here's a challenge. Look in your Bible and try to find a Jew worried about where he's going when he dies. You'll never find a Jew worried about where he's going when he dies. You know what Jews are always looking at? They're always looking, so let me tell you, I got a deal for you. They're always looking for a kingdom. And take a look at Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. We'll get to 24 here in a second. All right, look at verse 1. And when he had called unto him his 12 disciples, he gave them power against unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. Do you know why he did that? Do you know why the Lord healed people? Well, because he had compassion on sick people. No. I mean, yeah, I'm sure he did, but you know why he did that? That was the credentials of the Messiah. If a guy says, I'm the Messiah, you better, there was a checklist, okay? I want you to think about this, because I don't think everybody in Israel, when Jesus showed up, they just outright said, that ain't him. Don't you know there was some guy that was going, well, I got a checklist. And so this guy's talking with Jesus, about Jesus, and he goes, well, you think he's the Messiah? I don't know. First off, he'd have to be of the tribe of Judah. Oh, well, he is. Oh, he is? Oh, okay. Well, that's a yes. Yeah, he'd had been born in Bethlehem. Yeah, that's where he was born. Really? Well, he'd have to be of the lineage of David. Yeah, oh, really? You know what one of the credentials? He'd have to have a constitution for his kingdom. That's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. He'd have to heal. I'll show you that in a minute. But the healing and the miracles weren't sideshow, and they weren't even, I don't mean this in a bad way, they weren't born of compassion for people. It was the credentials of the Messiah. And so he's checking all this stuff off. So what does he say? He tells them to go out and do these things in verse 1. He gives their names in verses 2, 3, and 4. Now look at verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles. Is that our kin? And into any of the cities of the Samaritans enter ye not, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Let me say this. I'm going to say this. I said this in a message one time, and Anderson, hoping to hurt me, twisted what I said. I say, he is not my Messiah, because Gentiles were never promised a Messiah. We were never promised a Messiah. Oh, you can see in the Old Testament where it says the Gentiles shall follow him, but you can't find a place in the Old Testament where the Lord went up to it, where God spoke to a Gentile and said, I'm sending you a Messiah. You know what the Messiah was supposed to do? Free the Jews from Gentile tyranny. Well, who's he freeing the Gentiles from? So he was Israel's Messiah. That's why he said, don't go to the Gentiles, don't go to the Samaritans, go to the Jews. And what is the message? And go as you go, verse 7, and as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So the gospel of the kingdom is that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Israel had been waiting 1,000 years for the Messiah to show up. And you know what he said? He said, you 12 guys go out and tell them what they've been waiting years for is here. It is at hand. Now, I want to show you a little problem with your Bible. Look at verse 10, chapter 10. Get chapter 12. Keep 10 here and get chapter 12. Now, I want to read this again. Verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. That's chapter 10, right? Look at chapter 12, verse 17. That it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, behold, my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall show forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not strive nor cry, neither shall any man hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed shall he not break, and a smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory, and in his name shall the Gentiles trust. Wait a minute. In chapter 10, he says, don't go to the Gentiles, and in chapter 12, he says, you're going to the Gentiles. Right? Now, does that seem like a contradiction? Don't go, you're gone. Well, it would be a contradiction if there wasn't for one thing. Guys, this is not a tough question. What comes between 10 and 12? Oh, man, chapter 11 of Matthew changes history. Let me tell you what happened. Look at chapter 11. And the guy with this checklist who's waiting for the Messiah, he has got yes, 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 yes. He didn't have one no box. And somebody comes over and says, hey, how's he doing? Oh, man, I've never had anybody get this far. So he's the Messiah, huh? Oh, no. Not only is he not the Messiah, can't be. Oh, wait a minute. He's from the tribe of Judah. He was born in Bethlehem. He's from the lineage of David. He's working the miracles. He's got a constitution. You got yeses. Yeah, I know. But he can't be the Messiah. Why? I got a box here. I can't put a yes in. What is it? It says here that before our Messiah shows up, Elijah will show up before him. And nobody called Elijah showed up before this guy. We even asked John the Baptist if he was Elijah, and he said he wasn't. And now he's here, so Elijah can't show up. I can't put a yes here. He can't be the Messiah. Based on that one thing, there's no way he could be Messiah. Now look at chapter 11. And just to show you about those miracles, those healings, look at verse 1. And it came to pass when Jesus had made an end of commanding his 12 disciples, telling them to go to those when they're going out to the Jews, he departed thence to teach and to preach in their cities. Now when John had heard in the prison the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, art thou he that should come, or do we look for another? Now, this is the guy that for 6 months said, behold the Lamb of God take away the sin of the world. Now he's saying, hey, are you the Lamb of God, or are we looking for somebody else? And I heard a guy try to expound on that one time, and he said, well, John forgot who he was. Oh, man, he must have had instant Alzheimer's, bucko. Don't you know what he was doing? Have you never tried to insult somebody into doing something? You know what he's saying? Hey, you know what he's thinking? What do you think John thought when he got arrested? Surely Jesus will get me out of this. I mean, I am the forerunner. He is going to get me out. And Jesus isn't doing a thing for him. And he goes, hey, are you the one we're looking for? We're looking for another. He said, I want you guys to go smack, smack. That's what he wanted. And watch the Lord smack, smack back. Look we for another, verse 3. Jesus answered and said unto them, go and show John again those things which you do hear and see. The blind receive their sight. Now he just asked him, are you the Messiah? And here's how he answered. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. He's given them the healings were part of the credentials of the Messiah. And now watch the smack. And blessed is he whosoever shall not be offended in me. You go back here and smack him in the mouth with that one. So guys, you have this gospel. I just want to put this third one up. Now, look what he does in chapter 7. Look at verse 7. And as they departed, Jesus began to say unto the multitudes concerning John, what went ye out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken with the wind? But what went ye out for to see? A man clothed in soft raiment? Behold, they that wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. But what went ye out for to see? A prophet? Yea, I say unto you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare thy way before thee. Guys, can you see the guy with the checklist when he hears that? That's the verse about Elijah. And this guy who says, well, I wish he could be the Messiah, but there's no way I can check him out. He never had Elijah, and he's here now, so Elijah can't show up. And he said, behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare thy way before thee. Verse 11, verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. Watch this. And if ye will receive it, this is Elias, which was for to come. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. You know what he just said? He said, guys, if you will accept John as Elijah, I'm here. I'm your Messiah. This is your big chance. And I've often said this. You know what they did? You know, I'm a King James Bible believer. I wouldn't change a word of it. You know what I'd like to do? Retypeset it. I would put about that much space between verse 15 and 16. Because there is a silence between those two verses that changed history. Those Jews stood there like a spastic at an auction. They didn't even want to scratch their nose unless they bought something. They knew exactly what Jesus said. And by their silence, they rejected their Messiah. They didn't say, we'll take John and we'll take you. They said nothing. Look how Lord takes off at a tangent. He's mad now at verse 16. But whereunto shall I liken this generation? It is like unto children, saying in the markets, we have and calling unto their fellows, and saying, we have piped unto you, you have not danced. We have mourned unto you, and you have not lamented. Know what he's saying? He's saying, you guys have said, where's the Messiah? Where's the Messiah? Where's the Messiah? I'm here, and now you guys didn't want me. You know where it ends? He's not dealing with the Jews. Look at the chapter. Look at the last three verses. Come unto me, Jews that labor and are heavy laden. That ain't what it says. All ye that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart. You shall find rest unto your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. In 10, he sends the 12 apostles out through Israel, saying, preach, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The Messiah is here. In verse 11, or chapter 11, they reject him. In chapter 12, he says, okay, guys, go to the Gentiles. After that, it's over. All of history. You know what happens in Matthew chapter 13? The kingdom goes into a mystery form. They can't get that kingdom now, guys. It is over. It is now the time of the Jews and the time of the Gentiles, and it's our time. Now we're watching this part end. Now, here's the problem. This never came true. The Jews are still waiting for this, are they not? So now go to chapter 24. You know what they say? If you want to interpret something, 3 simple rules. Who's talking? Who's he talking to? And what's he talking about? Now those are pretty simple. You ought to, if you don't write those down somewhere, remember them. Who's doing the talking? Who is he talking to? And what is he talking about? All right, in Matthew chapter 24, look at verse 1. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, okay, first question, who's talking? Jesus. Verily, verily, I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? All right, who's he talking to? And what are they? They're Jews. So you got Jesus talking to Jews, and what's he talking about? He says this. Yeah, he's talking about the end times. For many shall come, verse 5, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. You know one of the things that Stephen Anderson says? If you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, you're going to be deceived into believing a false Christ. Because it says there, many will come in my... Can I ask you a question? How many of you believe that the Lord's going to come back in a Buick and drive into town and go, it's me? You know, I don't know about anybody else. Back in the 70s, we heard this guy, his name was Benjamin Cream. Anybody ever hear that guy? Benjamin Cream was the Messiah returned. And he was in England, and he was going to present himself to the world. And he never showed up. But you know what we all said? Wow, that must be him. You know what we said? Hey, when he comes, it'll be up there, and I'm going to hear a trumpet. He's not going to show up down here. So if anybody's not going to be fooled, it is us. But the Jews are looking for him. And they shall hear of wars, verse 6, and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famine and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Now, look at verse 11. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Look at verse 13. And he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. How many of you believe that? How many of you believe that you got to endure to the end to be saved? Oh, I thought you guys believe you have to trust Jesus Christ as your personal Savior to be saved, right? Then this isn't to you. Somebody has to make it to the end. And it's not you, and it's not me. Look, you cannot lose your salvation, can you? You don't have to. We have to endure, but we have to endure the time that we live in. We're not enduring to keep our salvation. In this case, somebody's got to endure to the end. Now look at verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness. What gospel? Not the gospel of the grace of God? Not the everlasting gospel, the gospel of the kingdom. You say, why? Because the first time it was preached, it got sidelined. The Jews rejected him. You know who's going to preach this gospel of the kingdom? First time he had 12 guys, right? You know who's going to preach this one? $144,000 Jews. You see them in Revelation. Now you say, oh, you know where they're preaching it? He told them in Matthew 10, go all over Israel, every city, and tell them the kingdom of heaven's at hand. Where does he tell them to go now? He's telling them to go to the whole world. You say, why this change? And what happened that 12 guys got the job the first time and they got replaced by 144,000? I saw a figure one time, and I've just got to speculate, guys, because I can't. It's probably somewhere in my notes, which could mean they'll find it in the millennium. But I don't know if you ever thought about this, but you know a long time this world had to recover from the flood. If you go to Salt Lake City, they tell you, I read this, geologists say, look up the mountains at 1,500 feet. They call this a bathtub ring. And there was the Salt Lake City, the Great Salt Lake, was very great. It was the inland sea. It was caused by, you know how like in a flood, stuff will dam up at a bridge and then it'll build up behind it? It was a natural dam, and the Salt Lake went 1,500 feet up the mountainside. And you can, if you ever fly into it, look at it, you can see 1,500 feet up, you can see a line. That was the high water mark during the flood. And then when that thing burst, you had the Grand Canyon inside about a week and a half. But guys, ooh, that's over millions of years. Then how come every river isn't that deep and wide? Guys, it's 3 miles across. Do you know what 3 miles across would be? An inch deep. And how much erosion is that going to cause? So what I'm saying is that this world had a long time to recover from the flood. How many people survived the flood? So how many people do you think there were by the time Jesus Christ came around? I read this figure, and there were something like a couple of million on the planet. Now there's over 8 billion. So there are more people than there were at the time of Christ. And in the time of Christ, if you want to find the Jews, you know where you went? Israel. Where do you find them now? Do you know that there are more Jews, this is recorded fact, there are more Jews right now as I speak in New York City than there are in the nation of Israel. So here's what's going to happen. We go up. These 144,000, by the way, if you keep your place, but go to Revelation 11. I'll show you how long these guys are going to be preaching this kingdom of heaven. And I'll show you exactly what happens to them. In fact, you know what you're going to get to do? You're going to get to, there's only one rapture in the Bible that, well, no, I take it back, there's two, that you can see happen. You can actually see the rapture take place in Scripture. The first one that I'm telling you about is when the Lord went up. In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, when he got done talking to them, they watched him go up. Guys, you got this idea that we're going to disappear like that? It says we're gone like he left. You know how we're leaving? They're going to watch us go. They're going to watch us. You say, well, what about the Great Delusion? Well, it doesn't have to be, that's the Great Delusion is going to be explaining how we disappeared. Why does that have to be the Great Delusion? Why wouldn't the Great Delusion be this? Do you know that Satan worshipers believe the same thing you believe? They believe that there's going to be an ultimate battle in Armageddon. Satan worshipers believe that God and his forces are going to meet in Armageddon just like you believe, but they think their guy's going to win. Guys, if the Lord has those 40 days prior to that rapture happening with a dead rising, and this world becomes polarized, nobody's going to get left behind. They're going to choose to stay behind. And when we leave, the devil's going to show up and say, hey guys, I'm the only show in town. You better get behind me because your hope just left. And I'm going to meet this guy in Armageddon. If you guys get behind me, we can whip him. The Great Delusion. All right? So that's the first rapture, and we'll show you a second rapture as it takes place. But that's not the first rapture. Jesus is the first fruits of our rapture. That's what it is. Look at chapter 11. And look at verse 3. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, that's Moses and Elijah, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. You know where they're going to prophesy? They're going to prophesy right here. They're going to prophesy during the Great Tribulation, that 3.5 years. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, and the fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. Imagine a 3.5-year drought. There's going to be a 3.5-year drought in this earth. But it's not bad. It's just the first 3.5 years. It's going to be kind of a big Disney World with no drinking fountains. And have power over water to turn them to blood. But it's not going to really be bad. It's going to be nice blood. And smite the earth with nice plagues as often as they will. And when they have finished their testimony after 3.5 years, the beast shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of that great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. That is Jerusalem. And they of the people and kindred and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3.5 days, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they shall dwell upon, they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these 2 prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. And after 3.5 days, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. Now, they went up. I'll show you who's going to go with them. So here's what's going to happen. For this first 3.5 years, here's where you are. You're here, you're gone out. Moses and Elijah show up. The 144,000 start going around the world preaching to the Jews, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Get to Israel. You'd better get to Israel. Hey guys, get to Israel. I'll give you a thought. First half of it was somebody else's and I added to it. A guy told me this one time. Now let me ask you a question. Do you know who the world's enemy is today? The enemy of everybody in the world today are the Muslims. The Muslims are killing Jews. The Muslims are killing Christians. The Muslims are killing Hindus. The Muslims are killing communists in China. The Muslims are killing Muslims. They are the plague of this planet, right? And our government, and it seems like every other government, is doing absolutely nothing to stop them. All right, now, for the Antichrist to rule this world, he's got to endear himself to the world, right? Okay, is the world in a bad financial situation? Well, I got news for you, bucko. Nobody's fixing that. You can't magically fix an economy. A world economy, it can't be done. So how is he, what if he did this to endear himself to the world? What if the Antichrist showed up and said, we've had it with you Muslims, and he pounded them. I mean, he bombed them to sand. It would be sad that we don't get to be here for that part. But anyway, but think about this, man. I mean, if somebody rose up today and bombed ISIS till there was nobody left, till they're down their knees saying, please stop, we're so sorry, we'll be good. That would be the hero of the world. Then he goes to Israel and says this, hey, you don't have to worry about the Jews, you don't have to worry about those Muslims anymore. Go ahead and build your temple. Tell you what, I'll even show up there. I'd like to be there for the dedication. I bet he would. So, the Antichrist shows up. Now the devil is not in him yet. So you got Moses and Elijah. They're preaching. You got water turning to blood. You've got all of the terrible things of the Great Tribulation. These guys are going all over the world saying, get to Israel, get to Israel, get to Israel. Then halfway through, right there, when Moses and Elijah go up, that's a rapture, correct? Look who goes with them. I know we're coming back. We're coming back to Matthew chapter... Can I show... Yeah, let me... keep your place in Revelation, but go back to Matthew 24. I want to show you an amazing prophetic thing in Matthew 24. Now look at verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Now verse 15 is an amazing verse. When ye, he's talking to Jews, shall see the abomination of desolation. Where would that be? That's the temple. That's in Jerusalem, right? So he's talking to Jews in Jerusalem at this time. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Whoa, back up again. Back up and look at verse 15. Look at the end of it. Whosoever readeth, let him understand. Who's he talking to? And where did he write it? In the New Testament. Do they read that? They will be then. That parenthesis is a prophetic verse. We know that during the tribulation, the Jews are going to be reading Matthew. And when that Antichrist walks into the temple and sits down and commits that abomination of desolation, somebody's going to go, hey, Irving, I read that in Matthew. And you know how you know it's good news? Because look how he ends that parenthesis. You couldn't ask for more than that. Verse 16, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field turn back to take his clothes. Notice this is all directed to people who are in Israel proper. I am not even sure of this. You know, we talk about the time of Jacob's trouble, this being the time of Jacob's trouble, and that the Antichrist is going to try to destroy the Jews, it may be just the Jews in Israel, in Palestine. Maybe Jews all around the world are in danger, and because of the way the society will be, it may well be. But this is definitely directed to the people in Israel, where that temple is. 19, woe to them that are with child and them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Sabbath day? That's Jewish, that's not ours. Watch this. For then shall be, what's the next two words? Great tribulation. And you know where that is? That's not here. That's here. That's why this first half is not called the tribulation. It's called the Great Tribulation, because this is the tribulation on everybody on the planet. You remember what happened with the plagues in Egypt? When it started out, everybody, the Jews and the Egyptians, were both bothered by them. And then God said, listen, I'm going to separate you from the Egyptians. This time the plague's going to affect them and not you. That's what he's going to do halfway through the tribulation. At the beginning, they're going to experience the water turn into blood too, just like they did in Egypt. They're going to experience this first half of this great tribulation. But it's not personal. It's God against the whole world because of their wickedness. And let's face it, Israel has been in unbelief for centuries, have they not? So they will deserve exactly what they're getting, just as surely as some lost Roman Catholic or some atheist. Great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So that is the Great Tribulation. Now, keep your place in Matthew, but go back to Revelation and go to 14. In Revelation chapter 14, you're going to watch this rapture take place. Look at verse 1. He says, I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion. Where's Mount Zion? Heaven. No, Mount Zion. He's standing on Mount Zion. Okay. Where is it? It's in Israel. Okay? So you've got the lamb, and who's with him? And with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. So in verse 1, you've got a marker that has died. Okay. In verse 1, they're standing on Mount Zion. Now look at verse 2. And I heard a voice from heaven. All right, you know where you hear something from? If you heard a car horn from out in the parking lot, then you're not hearing it from in this room, right? It's from the parking lot. They're on earth, and they're hearing a voice from heaven. Let me tell you what happened. You ever hear a car wreck? There's two things you hear with a car wreck. I heard a car wreck one time, but only heard half of it. I was in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm standing outside in this churchyard, and I didn't hear any kind of a squeal of tires. I just heard the impact of metal hitting metal. But I heard it from above me. Sure as I'm standing here, I said, I just heard a car wreck above me. And I looked up, and you know what I saw? I don't know if you realize this, but in our Air Force, do you know what the number one damage we have to our airplanes in practice? Wing damage. Because guys want to fly as close as they possibly can, and they end up hitting the wing, and they damage each other. And I looked up, and what I saw was two KC-135s. KC-135 is a 707, it's a tanker. And they were flying like this, and here's their flight path. And I went, wait a minute, if they're doing this, if we go back about 3 seconds, those guys got as close as they could, and I heard them slap wings. I know they hit. Now, they didn't go down in flames, they just hit wings. I heard it from above me, where I was not. So they're standing on Mount Zion, they hear a voice from heaven, verse 2, they heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and the voice of a great thunder, and heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. Now watch, verse 3. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts, and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. Now they're from the earth. So in verse 1, they're standing on Mount Zion. In verse 2, they hear a voice from heaven. And in verse 3, they're standing in front of the throne singing the song. And who is it? It's these guys and Moses and Elijah that you saw in Revelation chapter 11. So this first part of the tribulation, this Great Tribulation, we're going to be gone for it. But that Great Tribulation, the 144,000 will be looking out there for the Jews, tell them to go back to Israel. Moses and Elijah will be inflicting some of the damage that is being done to this world with their plagues. And then in the middle of the tribulation, there is a rapture. Now that's who's gone up in Matthew chapter 24. Look at Matthew chapter 24. Verse 27. For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, so on and so forth. And by the way, look at verse 31. And he shall send his angels with great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect. You know who's the elect? There's three, I don't want to say groups, it's hard to do this, but there's three people that have that title. I'll show it to you. Look at Isaiah chapter 42. Isaiah chapter 42, we just saw this quoted in Matthew chapter 12. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 1, Behold my servant whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him, and he shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. All right, Jesus is the elect, right? Okay. Can he be the elect of chapter 24 of Matthew where it says he's going to gather his elect together? No. Then it's got to be a different elect. Well, who would that be? Look at chapter 45, Isaiah 45. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. Let's just go on down to verse 4. For Jacob my servant's sake, for Israel mine elect. The first people as a group that's called elect are the Jews. Now see, here's where these Calvinists get all messed up because they think that we're so much the elect. The elect are Israel. So that is who is being gathered together in Matthew chapter 24. So that's a long explanation, guys, but the bottom line on this whole thing is that I lost my pointer. Oh well. Anyway, Matthew 24 is not for us. It is not aimed at us. It is not addressed to us, and I found it. Two more. I'll try to be done quickly. Go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. First Thessalonians chapter 1. Ironically, every chapter of 1 Thessalonians talks about the Lord coming back. Can I give you a sidebar thought? All right, who is our apostle? Paul. He is the one that told us about salvation by grace. He's the one that talks to us about grace, faith, forgiveness, worship, stand, wrestle. He's the one that taught us New Testament church polity, correct? He's the one that told us how to live, right? When we have a question, we go to Paul. He gets us ready for every single thing. If he has a problem, if your pastor has a problem in this church, I'm going to tell you what he's going to do. He's going to go to this book, and he's going to be reading something that Paul wrote to look for an answer. This is our apostle, and we're going through the tribulation, and in 14 books of the New Testament, he never mentioned it once. He never once talked. You know what? Here's what you will find. Do this on your own. You will find Paul telling us how to live, and then he'll talk about us leaving. He never says, here's how to live. Oh, and then there's going to be a tribulation, and then you're leaving. Never. Now, I got news for you guys. If this guy is supposed to be telling us to take care of us down here, he failed miserably not telling us that we're going through the tribulation. But he did tell us you're not, or that we're going through tribulation. But he told you you're not, because look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, and look at verse 10. To wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, even Jesus, which delivered us from the wrath to come. Amen. All right, then we are delivered from the wrath to come. You say, what's that? That. It's that. We are being delivered from that, guys. Look at chapter 5. First Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 9. For God hath not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation by our Lord Jesus Christ. So He is going to deliver us from the wrath to come. Now, let me tell you how these guys do their juggling act. They say that this first half is called the wrath. Or no, I'm sorry. This last half is called the wrath. And this first half is called the tribulation. So we go through the tribulation, and then according to Matthew chapter 24, verse 29, after the tribulation of those days, we get out and we escape the wrath to come. Here's the difference. Detribulation is a title. It is tribulation. If you study Paul, this guy, Stephen Anderson, he says the word tribulation appears 22 times in the New Testament. It does. He said 90% of the times it's talking about the tribulation. If you believe that, you deserve to be fooled. About 2 times it's talking about the tribulation. The rest of it is what... Am I not talking to anybody here that's been through tribulation? I mean, some of you, you've got bad backs, bad knees. You've buried children. You've lost your job. You've been divorced. Somebody ran out on you. Somebody broke your heart. You know what he said? The Lord said in John, we will have tribulation. And the majority of times when the word tribulation appears in the New Testament, that's what it's talking about. Just the tribulation of life. And so, but there is a time when the precedes the word tribulation. There is, mark it, never. Wrath is something that happens, but you don't find any place in the Bible where anything is titled the wrath, like the tribulation. So the fact is that this is all the wrath. I mean, come on, guys. You got water turning into blood and all the stuff that's going to happen, and that's not wrath. So we are saved from the wrath to come. And then one last one. I want you to go to Titus chapter 2. Titus chapter 2. You know, we say rapture, and I have been challenged on that because somebody said, well, the word rapture doesn't appear in the Bible. Well, no, it doesn't. Neither does the word Trinity. But we can find the Trinity, can we not? There are 3 that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these 3 are one. The Bible doesn't say Trinity. You know what the one word that God uses? Godhead. So if you prefer the word Godhead, rather than Trinity. That's fine. Don't think you're smarter than somebody or more holy, but you can do that. And if you don't like the word rapture, then I can give you 3 names in the Bible. The catching away. The translation. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5. We're going to be translated. The blessed hope. I like to call it the blessed hope because that is the Bible term. I use rapture because that's what we're talking about here, and that is easier to get it down. In Titus chapter 2, it says this, verse 12, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we shall live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. Look, all right, he's telling you how to live in this world, right? Now look at verse 13. Looking for that blessed hope. Why doesn't he say looking for 3.5 years tribulation before the blessed hope? In verse 12, he's telling you how to live. In verse 13, he's telling you you're getting out of here. Amen. Paul never, and I will categorically say that, Paul never says live, tribulation, rapture. Never. He never does. He has you telling you how to live, like verse 12. Then 13, we're getting out of here, okay? Looking for that blessed hope and glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Okay? So Titus chapter 2, verse 12 and 13, it calls it the blessed hope. Here's what I want you guys to do. Well, you guys can't do it. All right, you men. You're young. You're not married yet. You're going to marry your wife. And you say, honey, I'm going to pick you up out in front of the church and just wait for me. And so she goes out there and she waits. You don't come, but she's waiting. And while she's waiting, some guy comes by and mugs her and takes her purse. And somebody else chases her, tries to kill her. And then while she's there, there's a lightning storm, and she almost gets struck. And then and water turns to blood. And she stands out there waiting for you for 3.5 years, and then you show up. Would you call that a blessed hope? I thought a blessed hope is I don't have to go through any of that. I mean, that's kind of like a beat up hope. That's kind of like a bruised hope, a damaged hope. It's not a blessed hope. You know what the blessed hope is? We're not going through any of it. You know why it's called the blessed hope? Because we're not going through any of it. We're getting out of here. And you believe what you want, but we are going. So, the reason I believe in the pre-tribulation rapture, you find the church up to Revelation chapter 4, and it's gone. I'll talk to you about that tomorrow. It's called time of Jacob's trouble. It's called the Great Tribulation and Jacob's trouble. We're not here for either one of those. It is the fullness of the Gentiles. At the fullness of the Gentiles we go. Matthew 24 is not for us. We are delivered from the wrath to come, and it is a blessed hope. So what am I telling you? Well, actually, I'm telling you, quit watching the videos on the internet. That's what I'm telling you. Quit watching some space cadet just because he's got good quality video with a really lame biblical message, a non-biblical message. But I'm telling you that because that spirit, there is a spirit that will try to get you to believe that all this is wrong and that you're going through the tribulation because in the last days they'll not endure sound doctrine. And the they in that verse is you and me. And we have to be aware of that. I say it this way. If we got together tonight, I've always wanted to do this. What if we decided tonight we will make up a new doctrine? We're going to start a new doctrine and just come up with something corny. Here's what I've always wanted to have. I always want to have the church of the latter growth. The Bible talks about the latter growth. I want to have the church of latter growth. All of the men will have mullet haircuts. And we'll call it the church of the latter growth. Now you're going, oh, preacher, nobody will buy that. Are you kidding me? You ever watch Christian TV and what they buy? But here's what I'm telling you. If we did it 100 years ago, they wouldn't. Because that spirit wasn't around. They'll believe stuff today they wouldn't believe 100 years ago. You will believe stuff today you wouldn't believe 100 years ago. Okay? So guys, what I'm telling you, get this, let somebody hit that and fall. But what I'm telling you is that you have to be aware of yourself. And if you say, well, I can't be fooled, you've already been fooled. You've already been fooled. So I'm done. I'll talk to you more tomorrow about the erroneous teaching of this guy. He really does have some poor, lame, sorry teaching. And we'll look at it. Preacher.